أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Did you pick up the other copy of the book from the chapel? Yet?
I completely forgot that. I thought it was a
That's okay. We can go by there afterward and pick it up. It's in much better quality now than this. So we'll continue with the next advice. None of the matters of this world or of the next should deter you from Allah. Rabi'ah, meaning Rabi'ah al-Adawiyah, said, "While I am in this world, all I want from this world is to remember you," meaning Allah, "and my only wish for the hereafter is to be able to see you. Other than this, do with me as you wish." So, in this advice, we have the example of Rabia the Adawiyah, whose like maqam on the spiritual path was like so high that like she only wanted Allah, and all the aspects of the world just kind of fell away. But of course, that's a very high maqam, and one that we should aspire to. There are many stories of Rabia the Adawiyah, but I know that it's weird. Sometimes people obscure the messages, and they kind of. I remember when I was a teenager. Yeah, there was someone that I knew who used a quote from Rabia al-Adawiyah, and used it without its context, and used it solely in the sense of like trying to absolve himself of the obligations, because the quote kind of focused on like only wanting Allah, but tasawwuf, as we know, like requires or predicates that like we also fulfill our obligations to Allah. So we can't just like say, oh, I can be incredibly spiritual and of a very high spiritual level, and then completely forget about or ignore the obligations that have been mandated upon us. It's a very backwards and foolish way of treading upon the spiritual path. It's not actually treading upon it at all, right? The next advice: it is very important to take care of your members, limbs, and sense organs, and to safeguard them from evil. Use them to properly influence the education of your heart. Sahl ibn Abdullah at-Tustari has said, "Allah protects the hearts of those who protect their members from doing evil. No one whose heart is protected by Allah will be allowed by Him to feel insecure. Whoever receives Allah's security is transformed by Him into a leader who is followed by the people. Whoever is a guide appointed by Allah is made by Him into an example of perfection." So, of course, this advice is causing us to think about and make sure that we are cognizant of all of the things that can affect us from our physical organ perspective, on like what enters into our heart. Imam al-Ghazali talks about the windows to the heart, being like the different senses that we have: the eyes, the mouth, the ears, what we see, what we listen to, even like all the different things that we do. Everything has an effect on our heart, and if we're not careful and cautious about what we imbibe through any of those organs, then we'll fall victim to possibly bad things. Sometimes I kind of go on rants about things like music. I, alhamdulillah, was able to give up music like 12 years ago. Sorry? Oh, okay. And nowadays, like when I mention that, people are very, very like confused. Muslims, even, they're like, "How do you not do that?" And alhamdulillah, like that's something that's become easy for me. But like, you can't. And of course, this is like music of today. Right? Some people will say like the. I remember one of my friends mentioned once that like. Not verbatim, but like kind of a quote of Imam al-Ghazali about like if music is haram, then like then you should like prohibit the chirping of the birds or whatnot, right? And I sent back to that person like a multi-point response of in what context that could be meant, because of course the music of the time of Imam al-Ghazali is far different than the music of our day and age. Sheikh Joe Bradford calls current music audible pornography. And you can see like even the music from now as opposed to 40, 50, like from the 60s and 70s, there's actually actual meaning behind lyrics. And if you look at it from just the perspective of the lyrics, music nowadays is just trash. But not to critique it completely, but if what we're supposed to have our hearts completely enveloped with is Quran, right? And Quran is a melodic form of recitation, and if that is something, and if you are trying to have that in your heart, and at the same time you're trying to have music in your heart, and they're two sorts of competing melodic things, and if you have a sort of melody that's amplified by the different sorts of instruments that exist, and then of course that's going to be overpowering, right? Music has the ability to push and shape your emotions. If you're in a bad or a sad mood, if you listen to sad music, it can make you even more sad and put you into like a pseudo-depressive state. If you're happy and if you listen to like happy music, that can provide you with a sense of jubilation, anger as well. People are very, very moved by music, and if you're trying to put into your heart Quran, and at the same time you're listening, right? One of the windows of your heart being your ears. If you're listening to things that are competing with that, meaning the Quran, I don't see how the two can settle in one's heart. You have to pick one or the other, right? And even if you're going to try to make a case for the music, like we have certain nasheeds that are devoid of musical instruments that actually are in praises of the Prophet ﷺ or praises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those things can draw you closer to Allah, but the vast majority of music nowadays does quite the opposite, and calls to like the desires of the lower self. The next advice: forgive even though you may have the power to retaliate. Sa'ri says, whoever forgives while he has the power to take revenge is forgiven in his turn by Allah when he deserves punishment. So this is a very simple, sort of self-explanatory advice. Or when you have the ability to take revenge and you forgive, then you are open for the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a day where we will all require His, where we will all be in severe need of His forgiveness. The next advice: instead of seeking the faults of others, look at your own faults. Dhunnun has said, whoever looks for faults of others is blind to his own faults. Whoever looks for his own faults cannot see the faults of others. This is also kind of very self-explanatory. This is not to say that one should always be like completely blind to all of the things that everyone does when it's bad. But not to like seek out the faults of other people, right? Because then you're always inquiring about the state of other people as opposed to the state of yourself. And the purpose of the path of futuwa and tasawwuf is to elevate one's own self. And when you're constantly looking at other people, then you're usually looking down upon other people. You've heard the statement, right, where Imam Shafi'i was asked, like, how did you acquire such great character? And you've heard it, right? And then he said, I saw things that I didn't like in other people, and I eliminated them for myself.
Yeah, I heard he said, I listened to what my enemies said about me and I took it seriously.
I listened to what my enemies said about me and I took it seriously.
That's how I heard it, but same thing.
Or perhaps there's two different narrations. But either way, being like at least your enemies will usually be, so it's weird, right? There's like, there's a study done, or some studies done saying that like your meanest friend is actually your closest or your best one, because that person will be the most honest with you. And usually it's our siblings or people who are very close, like our parents, people who are very close amongst our family or very, very close friends, who will actually just be very straight up with us. And if we're devoid of that, then we're devoid of a lot of blessing. I know the person who critiques me the most is my brother. And other people, you actually have to really seek out their constructive criticisms for you. Whereas people who don't like you will just say whatever to your face. I know that like many times after, like, I'll have given like a khutbah that I think was absolutely horrible, and then people will be like, oh yeah, that was a great khutbah, and I'm like, I can see that you're lying through your teeth. And then other people will just be like, you did this, and then this, and then this. And I appreciate that so much more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It seems that the culture here today is not susceptible to that. Even if you take somebody on the side and you try to give them advice, they take that as offense because it hurts their ego and connects the ego with emotions. So how is that carried in this society or this culture?
How is the not seeking fault carried, or how is the
being honest and genuine with other people's mistakes when they do that? To be a good mirror.
Like, be a good mirror is just like the Muslims or the believers is the mirror of the believer.
Yeah.
How do we like act upon that?
Is that something that's exclusive for believers, or should we also go for the non-believers as well? So that's the first question.
I don't know for that question of like whether that's exclusive to believers or if that can be extended. But I think if we're trying to improve upon our relationship, just from like what it seems to me like if we want to try to improve the state of the condition of society as a whole, and that means working on individuals, like with ourselves first and foremost, that if we have close friends, that we should try to be as honest with them about like how good they are, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and just in the same like ask for that same sort of feedback.
Okay.
But I totally I see your point in that. Yeah, because we've become like a very narcissistic, egoistic society where I'm like the most awesome person ever, and everything that I do is great and fantastic, and I don't do anything wrong ever, and how dare you tell me that I'm doing, like what I'm doing is, at all has a hint of something like being off-putting. We can see that where that's led us, right? Because people who are built up by like hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of like followers on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatnot, they feel like they get like they're put at such a high station, and then as soon as one person critiques them, it's not even that person, the followed person, who has an adverse reaction, but like all the other people who support that person, who are fans, will will completely try to debase and demolish that one person for attempting criticism. And that's a disease of our society, that's manifested from a disease of our hearts. So may Allah cure us and protect us.
Ameen.
The next advice: strengthen your outer self with prayer and your inner self with remembrance of Allah. Yahya ibn Mu'adh said, Allah created man's soul and made its life dependent on remembrance. Allah created man's flesh and made its life dependent on prayer. He created the world, and protection from its dangers is possible only by abandoning it. He created the hereafter and made it possible to benefit from it only by working for it. So there's 4 things in the example, but the 2 primary ones that are mentioned in the advice are the outer self should be strengthened with prayer, and the inner self being strengthened with the remembrance of Allah. So we can see that like standing for long portions of the night, or like standing in Taraweeh or whatnot, or just like praying our extra nafil prayer, or sunnah and nafil prayers, that's something that's just going to even physically strengthen you. And I know there are people who, when it comes to Ramadan and they have to pray 20 rak'ahs, when they have to stand for just an hour, right? An hour max, an hour and a half, while their hafad like zip through the Quran, that they start to complain about it. But then they can easily stand in line to pay $1,000 for a new phone for like hours upon hours. That's a really sad state of affairs of people, and then of Muslims in particular. And then inner self, right? Strengthening one's inner self with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to constantly always be cognizant of Him and making remembrance of Him. And it makes complete sense from the quote of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, creating the world in protection from its dangers is only possible by abandoning it. Which is like very logical, because if there's danger in the world, then the only way to save oneself from the danger, or the easiest way to save oneself from the danger, is to completely avoid that danger, and you just avoid the world. Of course, not avoid like the world and send yourself into space, but
Dunya.
The dunya.
The bottom one.
Yeah. And then creating the hereafter, He created the hereafter and made it possible to benefit from it only by working for it. And all of that is working for it, right? Prayer, remembrance, abandoning the dunya. The next. So this is a story that's kind of like a little heavy. We'll see if we understand it, the first read through. Be among the lovers who obey with pleasure all the wishes of the beloved. Abu al-Hussein al-Maliki recounts that Nuri came to Junayd, this is Junayd al-Baghdadi, the great master of Tasawwuf, and said, I hear that you give discourses on every subject. Speak to me on whichever subject you choose, so that I may add things that you do not know. Right, so Nuri is saying to Junayd this, requesting from Junayd a discourse, and then he wants to add to it. So then Junayd says, what do you wish me to talk about? Nuri replied, love. Junayd said, let me tell you a story. My friends and I were in a garden. One of us was supposed to bring our meal, but he was late. We went up on a terrace to look out for him. We saw approaching us on the path a blind man accompanied by a youth with a beautiful countenance. Countenance is like face, right? We heard the blind man say to the younger one, you ordered me to do this, I did it. You prevented me from doing that, and I did not do it. I have never acted against your wishes. What else do you want from me? The young man said, I wish you to die. Very well, I will die, replied the blind man. He lay down and covered his face. I said to my friends, I was going back to Junayd, saying, I said to my friends, that blind man indeed looks lifeless, but he could not really have died. He must be pretending. Right, so this is like it makes sense in that sort of like train of thought, that if the young beautiful man who is the beloved asks for his lover to die because he will fulfill whatever wish the beloved wants with pleasure, right, and without any sort of hesitation. If he's told to die, then he just lies down. It doesn't make sense that he would actually just die. He can't take his own life, right? But then it says, we came down and we looked at the man. We shook him and saw that indeed he was dead. Nuri left without adding a word. So the story is one of just showing the complete and utter submission and obedience to the beloved. Right? But for ourselves, the beloved for us should be Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we do whatever Allah asks, or what His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks us to do, with pleasure, and without any sort of hesitation. The next, be lenient with your friends. Do not be cross with them, and do not talk harshly to them. Muhammad ibn Bashir tells of a quarrel between Ibn Sammak and a friend of his. At the end of the discussion, the friend said, let us meet tomorrow and continue this argument. Ibn Sammak answered, no, let us meet tomorrow and forgive each other. And so so the one wants to continue the argument, continue the discussion, and then Ibn Sammak is saying, no, let us meet tomorrow and forgive one another. which is really an incredible thing, because sometimes friends will get together and then they'll like argue about something, and then I've never heard of, in my personal experience, I've never heard of like an argument going on for so long and then being stopped and then being picked up the next day. It's either you don't talk about it or you just like forget about it. So the best course of action is to forgive and forget. And the next advice: respect others and be impressed only by the best in them. Junaid's dervishes complained to him about some people who kept asking him pointless questions. They requested him not to answer such people anymore. Junaid replied, "I do not see in them what you see in them. I hope that they will perchance fall on a word that they will understand, and that one word will save them." And so I know some people in my life who only see the best in other people, and that's something really, really good. I personally get very annoyed when, for example, here when people ask pointless questions upon questions upon questions, and you can usually tell when someone is asking a question to understand versus when someone's asking a question just to ask a question. I really dislike the latter. But the advice here is to be impressed only by the best in people, or to try to perceive only the best in people. And Junaid al-Baghdadi here, he is saying that like hopefully these people who you, my students, are getting annoyed with, hopefully my hope is that maybe they'll hear something and then based upon that they'll benefit, or they'll be saved. This next advice is also pretty heavy. The masters of Futuwa are told to give advice incessantly to their dervishes. But while they are preaching to them, they must never lose sight of the fact that many of the things that they ask of the dervishes are also missing in themselves. So even though one is preaching, one can acknowledge the fact that one is missing certain things and has to work on them. So Badr al-Maghazini, or al-Maghazini, says that he asked Bishr al-Hafi, "What do you think about living in Baghdad?" And during the time, Baghdad was like an epicenter, the metropolis, where there were a lot of people. Bishr answered, "If you wish to die as a Muslim, do not stay here." "Then why are you staying here?" Badr asked. "If a servant ceases to follow Allah's commands, Allah throws him into a destructive and evil place," Bishr replied. "I must have stopped following Allah's commands, for He has thrown me here." So what really stuck out to me in this account, right, was more so the example than even the advice. Because if you see Bishr al-Hafi, he who's known as Bishr the Barefoot Hafi, right, who used to walk without shoes. And Imam Ahmad even praised Bishr al-Hafi, right? That he said the reason he's advising Badr here not to stay in Baghdad if he wants to die as a Muslim, but he himself is living in Baghdad, and he himself is saying that I must have stopped following the commandments of Allah, and therefore He's thrown me here, like He's thrown me off into here. Which is really, really, like, we should always be cognizant of the condition, like the situation we're in, the condition that we're in, and if we have done anything to quote unquote deserve it, right? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't ultimately always have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That everything that people sometimes they keep thinking that when bad things happen to them that Allah is punishing them, and then therefore that's bad, like Allah is angry with them. Allah's punishment isn't necessarily always because of His anger. Most likely for the punishment in this dunya is so that we as Muslims don't have to be punished in the hereafter. Therefore we're purified here as opposed to the hereafter. So Allah actually is doing that for our good. And that's if he's punishing us. That's if the things that are in our perception bad are happening to us, are punishment. But alternatively, there are means of Allah raising our station, right? So just raising our level in the hereafter, and that's all good. That's like, so the mindset that we should have is that everything that happens to us is always for our good. Everything that Allah causes for us to experience, if it's seemingly bad, it's still ultimately for our good, as long as we have that faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it for our good, and we have a good impression, we have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next advice: on the other hand, the novice must accept the words of his master even if he does not understand them, until the blessing of these words raises him to the level of understanding. So this is something that the example goes on with the story, but to preface it, right? Many times where before we learn everything, or before we even learn a sufficient amount, we want to start like talking and giving answers or whatnot. And I think every single human being has fallen victim to this in one situation or another. But the advice here is making sure that we just kind of sit and listen and get through everything first, until not even we think we have reached a status where we can actually like say that we understand, but others might even come to us, right? Others from our teachers, or from the ranks of our teachers, might also like kind of prod and probe us for our understanding. So on this matter, Junaid says, I sat in the presence of sheikhs for 10 years. They would talk about the wisdom of Sufism. I never understood what they discussed, but I never raised objections to their words. Every Friday I listened to their discourses, although I did not understand a thing they said. I felt that it was true. Although I did not understand a thing they said, I felt it was true, and I prevented myself from falling into the cursed state of denial. After 10 years had passed, they came to me one day and said, there is such and such a problem. If you have heard anything pertaining to a similar situation, tell us. Alright, so here we have the mark of like the proper student is that he or she just sits and absorbs everything, and then it takes time for understanding to actually develop. And so it behooves us to also understand that, we won't be able to just regurgitate everything with like perfect understanding. I know the first time that I was studying usul al-fiqh, my teacher, he said, sometimes people go through like a weekend intensive for usul al-fiqh, but we're going through it over like 2 semesters, right? Like 6 months of time, just for like a basic course, because you need time to process. You can't just like flash bang, Friday to Sunday or Saturday to Sunday, like just sit there and like take in everything, and then you just magically know everything. Things take time to process, so that if you have a question that comes up or whatnot, then you're able to like go back, prod it a little bit more and come to a deeper understanding of it. But many times we watch like a short YouTube clip on something, and then, or read an article on something, and then like we're experts, which is also another downfall of our age, right? The next advice: be compassionate and prefer the interests of your brethren to your own egotism. According to the report of Muhammad ibn Hassan, Abu Ja'far al-Asfahani, who was Abu Turab's dervish, told this story. Abu Turab went to Mecca for the pilgrimage. A man from Khurasan came to him. He had 10,000 dirhams in his possession. He opened the bag and said, O Abu Turab, should be O Aba Turab, but this is English, so the rules of Arabic grammar don't apply in English. O Abu Turab, take this. So he said, take this bag of 10,000 dirhams. Abu Turab replied, pour it out. The man from Khurasan poured the money onto the ground in front of Abu Turab. Abu Turab took 2 dirhams, gave them to one of his dervishes, and asked him to go buy a shirt. He then tore up the shirt into shreds, making little bags out of them, and put handfuls of money in each. He then sent them to poor people, thus avoiding the embarrassment that would be caused by their having to come and ask for it. Right, that's one. Yeah.
Yeah, just from an economics, was he living in a rich city or a poor city at the time? When was this?
This is happening in Mecca during Hajj.
Okay.
But outside of that, we're
Yeah.
not given context.
Okay, so the Hanafi madhab, they usually say like give a big chunk at once, because that's how much like you need. There's something called the poverty trap, and they need to push people beyond it. So it's just usually better to
give a whole chunk at once.
a whole chunk at once.
Okay.
So that's according to the Hanafi.
Okay. I did not know that. So you push people above the
So the poverty trap.
line.
Yeah. So the poverty trap is how much money are you making today, and how much money your grandkids will make.
Mm.
And there is a certain point where it's just a straight line. So no matter how much you're making, it's not going to affect your grandkids.
Okay.
So for example, in the States, I think it's about $4,000 a month. So between $2,000 and $4,000, they're really not changing your children's or grandchildren's lives. But once you go above $4,000 a month, that's when you start making.
So that you're accumulating enough to you mean save for in terms
exactly
of
save and then just cover everything, cover all the necessities.
Okay. I'm not sure if how that would work in pre-modern times. Like not just pre-modern in the last 100, 200 years. I mean like hundreds of years.
So the Hanafis would say like usually just give a big chunk to one poor person rather than just give it out all out. And they would give the example of seeds, like you don't feed the seeds, the precious seeds to the chicken. You use it to farm.
Okay. I see. So maybe
It's just
the
something
development,
on the side,
yeah. So the development of that aspect of economic theory probably did not enter the madahib at this point in time. So, but then of course also the hadaf, the object, right, of this story is to make sure that preferring the interests of one's. We'll get to the end, the end of the narration.
Wraps it up.
Yeah, wraps up how it relates to one, the compassion and the interest of one's brethren over one's own egotism. So one was he sent them to poor people, thus avoiding the embarrassment that would be caused by their having to come ask for it. So that was one, which is nice. And then when the money was almost distributed, a man reminded him that his own dervishes had not eaten anything for many days. So Abu Turab took a handful of dirhams, gave it to him, and said, "Take this and feed them." Then a woman approached. "O Abu Turab," she said, "what about your own family?" Turning to his dervishes, Abu Turab said, "See if there is anything left." They searched on the ground, found 2 dirhams, and gave them to her. So he even preferred he preferred everyone else and those who he saw who were in immediate need before the thought of his own family had entered into his mind. And of course this is in the sense of preferring others over oneself, but it's also an obligation to make sure that one's family is taken care of. Right? Al-aqrab should go first, the ones who are closest to you, and the closest to you are of course one's family. Which is why the zakat, even that it should be given to, it can't be given to one's immediate family members, right? But one's aunts and uncles and those who one isn't responsible for, that person can give zakat to those people, and that's rewarded most. The next advice. In a tradition that comes to us through Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Baghdadi, Sari al-Saqati informs us of the following characteristics of the Sufis. They refuse to act for the fulfillment of their egos or to obtain anything that has a taste of willfulness, lust, pleasure, or whim. They are able to resist the commands of their egos. They firmly pursue 5 goals: never to be envious, of what other people have, never to trouble other people, and always control their hands, their stomachs, and their sexual desires. They are humble and they follow the ones who are superior to them in mystical knowledge. They turn away from 5 evils, from everything that is temporal, from people, from desires, from the wish to be leaders, from the love of being praised. Then they wish for 5 gifts, that little of this world be given to them, but that the truth be given to them. That the fear of Allah be given to them. That's number 2. That the company of the ones close to Allah be given to them, and that they be saved from the company of the ones who oppose Allah. That they be given the ability to know and do things that please Allah, and that they receive the things rejected by the ignorant. There's a lot there. So we're gonna have to just move on for the sake of making sure we stick to time. So we'll go for maybe another 5 minutes, which maybe we'll get through 2 more. To know Allah and to be able to endure pain and suffering for His sake is one of the main goals of Futuwa. Abu al-Faraj al-Warathani reports that Dhunnun said, "One day in Egypt I saw some children throwing stones at a man. I asked the children what they wanted from him. They said, 'He is insane. He claims that he sees Allah.' I asked them to leave him alone and to let me see him. I approached and I saw a young man leaning on a wall and told him, 'May Allah have mercy upon you. Do you know what these children say? They say that you claim to see Allah.' The young man did not answer and kept quiet for an hour. Then he lifted his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. 'Allah is my witness that I have never lost him since I came to know him.' He said and recited this poem. 'O from heights unreachable by us who are made of clay, blessings are sent. This life is but a struggle. The feet find their way only with death.'" This is related to the next advice, which will make slightly more sense when covered together. "When trouble and suffering come upon you, accept them and do not complain." Abdul Wahid ibn Bakr reports that Muhammad ibn Mahbub said, "I was wandering in the streets of Baghdad. I passed through an insane asylum where I saw a beautiful young man with shackles on his ankles and around his neck. I was so pained at this sight that I turned away from him. He called after me by my name, 'O Ibn Mahbub, your Lord has put these shackles around my neck and on my feet because I love him so. Is he not satisfied yet? Tell him that if he is pleased, I do not mind this state of mine.' Then he recited this poem. 'The one whom you brought close to you cannot stand to be away from you. The one who is caught by love cannot stand to be away from you. If the eyes cannot see you, the heart does.'" So ultimately, right, any sort of pain and suffering and the ability to endure that pain and suffering for the sake of Allah is that which is desired, that which is one of the main goals, which is exemplified by the Sahaba, right, through all of the suffering, through all of the torture, that they were able to, men and women alike. Right, we know the first martyr in Islam was Sumayya, the wife of Yasir, that she was able to endure great suffering for the sake of Allah. So she was an exemplar of Futuwa. Let's see. Maybe we can do 2 more because they're short. "Seek a humble life and poverty and be content and happy with it." We learn from Abu al-Faraj al-Warathani that Bishr ibn al-Harith said, "So Allah considers martyrdom a hidden pearl and offers it only to His most beloved servants. In the opinion of the believers, poverty is also such a hidden pearl." So this is actually really deep, right? Because martyrdom is that which is initially rewarded with without any sort of hisab, without any sort of accounting. And one doesn't require a janazah, and from the time of one being put into one's grave, a martyr becomes, a bird of paradise until the day of judgment. And that's something that Allah only offers to His most beloved servants. So that the station of that is, of course, very high. And then also in the opinion of the Muslims, poverty is also such a hidden pearl. And most people actually don't think about that because we've somehow also fallen into the trap of, when I'm doing well in a dunyawi sense, when I'm doing well in a material sense, then I know that God is pleased with me, because then He'll so everything's going well for me, so He must be pleased with me. But that's not necessarily always the case. It could be a trial. But poverty is something where we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he asked to be a servant prophet. He asked to be someone who was poor, right, throughout his entire life, and to be raised with the poor. And the poor are the ones who will enter into paradise first. So that's also a very hidden gift. And then the last advice that we'll cover for this, inshallah, for this class. It is detestable to fawn over and flatter someone in order to gain favor. Abdul Wahid ibn Bakr reports that Abu Abdullah al-Qurashi said, "The one who flatters his own or someone else's ego will never smell the perfume of sincerity." And this is something that our society has also fallen victim to very, very heavily. So I'll just reiterate the advice. It is detestable to fawn over and flatter someone in order to gain favor.
So again, they get offended, or the society or the culture here are not designed to, and even if you do it with adab or etiquette, so it's almost like I don't know, I am either gonna end up being known as obnoxious, or
so to not praise,
yeah,
not
so
to fawn over.
not praise their ego. They would say I'm rude, and anybody who tries to do anything should be praised, even if he gets the 9th position in a basketball game and he's a 30-year-old adult.
So
we should praise him, And I tell him, you gave it a good job, but I think you can do better. And that's offensive for them.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not been okay. Maybe I've just become immune to those sorts of reactions. But I'm the last person. I'm the last person to praise someone.
Yeah.
I remember.
And they expect you to praise. If you don't praise, it means you don't care.
Yeah, but I'm of the opinion that we should only really compliment someone when
they deserve it.
They deserve it, or with the exception of children or students who need to be encouraged. But even then, when students here, you can ask almost anyone. I think I've become too nice this year especially. I think it was at a staff meeting a few weeks ago, where I gave someone a compliment, and they were in front of the rest of the staff, our small staff meeting. They're like, "Bilal, just give a compliment?" And I said, "Yeah, then it's true." It's actually so it for me, because I do it so rarely, I think then it's actually appreciated, even though I might get teased about finally doing that. But I don't think it's so this is from, it's detestable to fawn over and flatter someone in order to gain favor. So this usually just happens, yes, this happens on a societal level, but it usually happens when you're actually trying to seek some sort of, people do this to the president all the time. That's what's detestable. But your question was more so how do we still like exist? How do we live in this society where it's expected that you're always like I'll notice this, or I've noticed this in like memes on Instagram and elsewhere, that like if a girl puts up like a different profile picture and there's like however many friends of hers, and she's like, yes, girl, gorgeous, beautiful, blah 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 blah, right? And
if the guy does it, it's like maybe
okay, so guys shouldn't be commenting on that in the first place. But the thing is, like, okay, if you want to do that out of sincerity. Guys don't do that to other guys, but if the expectation from the person who's posting something is like you must commend me on that, then that's a problem here. And the purpose of going through this book and for our classes, not to fix society as a whole and tackle it, but to fix ourselves first. So if we are doing that, then we're just cognizant of that. If you in your personal experience, it's considered rude when you don't compliment people. I don't actually see how that. Maybe I've just become immune to that. Because when I notice, like, I know people who just always compliment other people, and I try to make it a point for myself to only give like the sincerest of compliments. And then because I attempt to do that, when I receive a compliment, like you said, oh, we're wearing like matching, like nice colors, matching colors, or similar colors or whatnot, I like that because I assume that like that was a sincere, genuine compliment. But when I know people who are like, oh, I like this, I like that, I like this, I like that, things are like really nice about you or whatever, to me that gets annoying. But maybe that's just because I've conditioned myself to be really harsh, and I might need to gravitate back toward the center. I don't know if that's answering or making sense at all.
It does, and I can relate to it. Maybe we can talk about it once
we'll do that. Okay, so we'll end this because we can start walking there anyways. We can pick up the book from the chapel. Okay. Yeah. So we'll pick up next week, and next week will be the last session for the semester, and we'll start again, inshallah, in the spring. وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. For those who actually watched online, جزاكم الله خيرا.